The following video will concern laws in the United States. There's 100,000 laws you could be breaking right now. Good luck. I am not a lawyer, but I'm able to look up some things, and what I do is I look up what I call best practices, or what some people call looking for loopholes. I find a way to obey every law so that I can't run afoul of it, so that certain people can't have fun putting handcuffs on me and acting out some twisted game. Zinc, tin, pot metals, die cast, alloy, powdered binder. Material names that are used in the law or in citations concerning them for low melt point, weak, or substandard materials that are used mostly for making toys and some other parts, being used to make firearms, receivers, and frames, for pistols primarily. Also called by scaremongers, lawyers, and politicians all alike as cheap, junk, Saturday night specials, ring of fire firearms, or suicide special weapons. The origin story for this versus its actual outcome. Depending on how you look at it, it was protecting people in vulnerable areas where a lot of crime happened from each other and from exploitation by people selling them weapons of really small-scale gang war. Or economic discrimination against poverty, low income, and poor people having Second Amendment rights, and selective enforcement when cops wanted the same things they were trying to outlaw, especially when glocks came along made out of plastics that would fit the same bill as being weak, at least on paper, for technical reasons. For those of you not aware, the part of a firearm that is regulated, firearms, pistols, shotguns, and rifles, you gotta look up all the definitions, is called the frame or receiver. This is the part that all of the other parts connect to. The bare minimum for firing a cartridge is a barrel with a chamber milled into it that you can put the cartridge in all the way if necessary, place a plate against it, and have a hole in that plate so that a firing pin can hit the back of the cartridge at either the edge of it on a rim fire or the center of it in center fire cartridges to fire it down the barrel. A very minimal arrangement for something that can fire a cartridge can legally qualify as not being a firearm. In fact, there are many non-firearms that fire cartridges that are deadly or are used for some other purpose, like driving a nail, using a blank, signaling flare guns, noisemakers for scaring away wildlife. I own one. Propelling T-shirts in a crowd. Legally speaking, you can use blanks instead of air compressors, depending on where you are. A gun bought on a Friday might explode on a Saturday night, only lasting a single day. So said the Coffeyville Daily Journal, who coined the term the Saturday Night Special in 1917, September 29th. Complaining about the previous weekend where a company or a group of companies decided to have a Friday night special on pistols. And the Saturday night special was all the injuries and accidental shootings and misfires and jams that everybody was complaining about, mockingly calling them Saturday night specials. That's the origin story. Now we skip ahead to 1968, where we have an actual reference to what we would now call vaguely Saturday night specials. I'm not including zip guns or homemade guns here. I'm talking about mass-produced guns made by people who do not intend to own or use them at the time, not all of them anyway, selling them for commercial purposes as manufacturing them. Making a firearm is legally different than manufacturing for the purpose of sale. 1968 Gun Control Act, GCA 1968, or GCA 68, bans the importation of cheaply made guns, or manufactured guns. If you made one in another country and brought it in and said, I'm the maker, they wouldn't ban it. There was also guns that were in existence, obviously, that were cheap from 1917 forward, or even earlier, that were made poorly that weren't banned at that point. They just couldn't bring in any more. By banning importation, this caused U.S. companies to be formed and opened from 1973 to 1999, and even earlier than that, that were called the Ring of Fire companies because of the namings they used and for the companies and also some of the products. These were duplicates of the cheaply made products licensed by the companies from outside of the country because there was no law saying that you and I can't make them and you and I can't start a business manufacturing them. This caused a shift. 1985, incarcerated felons and criminals preferred revolvers over semi-automatic firearms for reliability reasons and simplicity, and also because they didn't leave shell casings behind. By 1995, because of this changeover, incarcerated felons and criminals preferred semi-automatic firearms over revolvers because they'd finally gotten to the point that criminals liked them. Recommended by Criminal Near You. This caused people to change a bunch of rules. Did I mention cops wanted glocks eventually, which are semi-automatic firearms, not revolvers? Gun roster boards started to be created to sort of backdoor outlaw certain guns, or doing it for real reasons. Judgment of the gun's quality was based on fitness for sporting, or self-defense, or police purposes, or all three. Based on how concealable it is. Ballistic accuracy. Does the damn thing shoot straight? Does it hit the same place each time if you put it in a vise and fired it? Safety. Reliability. Drop testing. Does the damn thing shoot you in the foot if you drop it or just put it in your holster? Loaded chamber indicators, trigger locks, detectability, and sometimes the total weight of the gun being above or below a certain number were used as a judgment of these in many laws prior to 1999 or 1970s, depending on where you were. Some of the rules, which is the reason for this video, involved whether or not the metal could melt for the frame receiver or any part of the gun. 800 degrees to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit were the numbers that were often quoted, sometimes in between, for the melting point of any one part or the main frame. Not based on safety, but based on being able to tell whether or not it was made cheaply, because molding and casting parts, like cast steel or pot metal or die casting, was cheap. You could mass produce frames. The rest of the parts you could buy from any other place or use parts from another gun that it was an imitation of. And toys are made by the same method. Toys melt at 1,000 degrees or less. They're pot metal. They're made out of die cast. They're made out of tin, zinc, or alloy. Or aluminum, right? Well, here we go. Grams per cubic centimeter density test at 7.5 grams per cubic centimeter requirement. It had to have a certain density, meaning it really needed to be steel, right? PSI or tensile strength, minimum of 55,000 PSI is quoted. Other places just said it couldn't melt. Aluminum melts at 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can get 14,000 PSI and 55,000 PSI aluminum. T4 2024 alloy existed. What was it used? To build an all-aluminum shotgun? Because shotguns have a PSI requirement of less than 2,000 PSI or 20,000 PSI, excuse me. So making it double the strength at 55,000 PSI exactly wasn't an accident. States like Massachusetts, Maryland, California, Washington, D.C., New York, Illinois, Hawaii, Minnesota, South Carolina, Wisconsin, and Oregon, and New Jersey had laws like this at one time or another because it became a problem. Guns would blow up, or they were just too available to poor people. None of these rules, except in California and a few other places, outlawed me making a firearm from scratch out of steel, complying with all these rules. California went out of their way to make it illegal, de facto illegal, without outright saying it, that you can't make your own firearm. They wanted you to buy firearms, and their explicit, they had all of these things in their rules about it has to be safe. It has to keep a kid from using it. Put a trigger lock on it. Some damn thing. Something. Because they got tired of not shootings and murders between criminals or even you and I. They don't give a shit about us. Kids were getting shot because they'd find a gun and play with it. I mean, that was partially their impetus. The rest of it has to do with, disarming poor people in poor neighborhoods. It didn't matter if they were Latino, black, or white, just didn't want you to have a firearm because, as they saw it, having an army of police officers with no possibility of ulterior motives protecting you from each other was better than you all walking around cowboy style with a gun on your hip. Meanwhile, 2 hunks of pipe, cork, a nail, and an end cap, and you've got a shotgun that can take out 10 people if you do it wrong, and 1 person very well if you do it right. And that was not illegal except in California for a very long time. So, what's the best practices? Here's the metals. These are metals that melt below 1,000 degrees. I've already gone over aluminum. Certain versions of aluminum melt lower. Zinc melts at 787 degrees Fahrenheit and has almost all the same characteristics, including the rest of them that are needed for the rules, as steel. So zinc imitates steel very well. Then there's lead, doesn't come anywhere close, but it melts at 620 degrees or so. Cadmium at 610. Yes, these are metals that were listed in one of the laws because they covered all the metals, metallic elements. Selenium at 423 versus tin at 450, which again, almost the same density, 31,000, 32,000 psi, pretty close. Yes, you can make a shotgun out of tin. It's been done just as a test. Zinc, anywhere from 5,000 psi, depending on the amalgam mix. Then you have solder and eutectic solder versions that are like tin zinc. Sodium, metal, melts at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm being ridiculous, but let's list them because a law did. Potassium melts at 146, and phosphorus melts at 110, and mercury melts at negative 38 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit or something. I'm not even sure if these are accurate, but, lawyers and judges and such. So yeah, unless you made a gun out of aluminum, which was just barely, well, depending on whether or not it's at a certain state of its mix, you could mill it. Also, bronze and brass was totally qualified and worked, and people made guns out of that. And so did some companies. You can get all brass flare guns and all brass muzzle loaders and fully normal revolvers that exist, because they're waterproof and they're called Navy revolvers. But they weren't excluded. Basically, a bunch of people made a bunch of laws trying to get rid of cheap firearms and made a rule set that the only leftover one is that it can't melt below 1,000 degrees or 800 degrees, depending. Specifically getting rid of zinc and tin and all the other metals that are cheap, but allowing for aluminum in almost all cases. And yes, there are aluminum rifles. They just have a steel barrel liner and that sort of thing. Now, why did I do this video? What are the best practices for all states? Make a gun California compliant. Make it out of steel, because it's not really any more expensive or less if you make it the right way. And you can sell or own or just keep in bear arms that you've made that are cheaply made so poor people aren't excluded. The idea that this was to exclude poor people was also based on the poor people not being resourceful enough to make zip guns. Most zip guns, if you're not aware of it, are outlawed because they comply with these rules. They're not Saturday Night Specials. They're not made this way. They're made out of steel and parts that do not melt. So they would actually qualify. So they made a separate rule for homemade guns that looked bad, which didn't fly because lots of people owned guns that were really nice looking but made the same way. Once laws got pushed, again, like I said, only California had a law against you making your own firearm. Federally, it's not illegal. It's one of the ways of acquiring a firearm without having to deal with the laws in your area, because they're almost always based on buying a gun or involving a gun part or a full gun that was at one time manufactured for sale. If you make it yourself, the laws don't apply. I'm in the state of Oregon. We have a law now that says if I want to go buy a gun, I have to get a permit. It says nothing about me making one from scratch. And it doesn't cover muzzle loaders and cap and ball or potato cannons. So, why did I make this video? Because the laws are ambiguous. They're all over the place, and there's several states that have these laws on the books but don't enforce them, or don't have them on the books, and pseudo-enforce them by calling them zip guns or something else now. And if you were trying to find out what's really going on, you have 4 links below in the description, one of them being a Wikipedia one, that are as clear as mud, and I hope I've cleared this up at least a little. But again, if it's made out of aluminum or something better, it doesn't qualify under these rules. And if it's manufactured well, even if it's only just made by you, they won't enforce it unless they're being really pissy. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck.